Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into an event that's truly unique in American history.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the second inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States.
Yeah.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
Hmm.
A second inauguration. Didn't he already serve a term? And you'd be absolutely right. This wasn't like a back-to-back second term. Think Grover Cleveland back in the 1800s.
Oh, okay.
He's the only other president to have pulled this off. And here's the kicker. All this juicy detail, all the stuff we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
It all comes from just one source.
Really?
The Wikipedia article on the inauguration. Proof that even a single page can give you a fascinatingly complex picture of history.
It's incredible what you can find on Wikipedia sometimes.
Yeah.
It's a gold mine.
Totally. Okay, so picture this. It's January 20th, 2025, Inauguration Day.
Yeah.
But there's a twist. Instead of the usual pomp and circumstance on the steps of the Capitol building,
Right.
this ceremony went down inside, in the Capitol Rotunda.
That's-
Yeah. Why? Well, Mother Nature decided to throw a wrench in the works with some, let's say, brisk temperatures.
Oh, wow. So it was like a weather situation.
Exactly. It was freezing. So we're talking about the first indoor inauguration since Reagan way back in '85.
That's interesting.
And the weather wasn't the only thing that was a little unusual that day.
Oh, really?
The
Well,
political climate was, well, let's just say, a bit frosty, too.
I see. Yeah, the nation was definitely deeply divided. I remember there were echoes of that Women's March from Trump's first inauguration. Remember the People's March? Protests were planned.
Oh, yeah.
And the Capitol Police were definitely on high alert. They had all these intelligence assessments
Right.
pointing to potential clashes.
So you have this tension, right? This backdrop of potential unrest. But then on the flip side,
Yeah.
you have this incredibly diverse guest list. We're talking A-listers, politicians, international figures.
Oh, yeah. This was a big deal, historically speaking. It was the first time foreign leaders were formally invited to a U.S. presidential inauguration. It was a real mix. You had your political heavyweights, international figures, tech titans, and then, well, let's just say some interesting celebrity appearances.
You can say that again. It definitely added a certain flavor to the whole event.
Yeah,
It was a guest list that people are still talking about, even a little bit controversial.
definitely.
So let's start with the political elite, shall we?
Sure.
You had former presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, even Barack Obama, Trump's immediate predecessor. It was like a visual representation of the peaceful transfer of power,
Yeah.
that cornerstone of American democracy.
Right. And speaking of former first ladies, Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush were also there. But you know what's interesting?
What's that?
Michelle Obama was noticeably absent.
Oh, that is interesting.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the behind-the-scenes dynamics, the
Yeah,
relationships.
totally. Like,
Yeah.
what's the story there?
Huh?
Okay, then you've got this really fascinating international contingent. Chinese Vice President Han Zheng being there was a historic first. I mean, he was the highest-ranking Chinese official to ever attend a U.S. inauguration. And on top of that, you had Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Argentine President Javier Milei. It was a truly global gathering.
Yeah, it really was. And you know what else is noteworthy?
What's that?
The absence of Russian President Vladimir Putin speaks volumes, don't you think, about the whole geopolitical landscape at the time.
Oh, yeah, the strained relationship between the U.S. and Russia.
It's sad.
It's wild, right? Every presence, every absence, it's like its own little story.
It is.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
Oh, yeah, because this inauguration wasn't just about politicians.
Hmm.
The tech world made a grand entrance. We're talking Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. It was like Silicon Valley decided to hold a board meeting at the inauguration.
That's one way to put it. And, their presence, especially the large donations from these tech leaders, OpenAI's Sam Altman, Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, Uber's Dara Khosrowshahi, it raises some questions.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, historian Margaret O'Mara suggested that these contributions might have been strategic, a way to curry favor with the new administration, maybe soften any potential regulatory scrutiny down the line.
It really makes you think about the intersection of technology, politics, and power. Are these tech giants simply exercising their right to political participation?
Right?
Or is there something more going on here, a blurring of the lines between business and government?
It's a debate that's likely to continue as technology becomes even more intertwined with our lives.
And with global affairs.
Exactly.
Now, while all these big names were heading to the inauguration, there was another side to the story, the boycotts. A number of Democratic members of Congress, big names like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, even Nancy Pelosi decided to skip the event.
They did. And their reasons varied. Some cited scheduling conflicts with events for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Others pointed to the trauma of the January 6th attack.
Oh, yeah.
That attack on the Capitol, it really shook the nation. It left many questioning the stability of our democracy.
It did.
A stark reminder of how divided we were as a country.
Absolutely. So you have this mix, right? Celebration, protest, boycotts,
Yeah.
all against this backdrop of a divided nation.
It was tense time.
It was. And while some were boycotting, the Trump campaign was holding a pre-inauguration rally at Capital One Arena. Now, this was not your average political rally.
It wasn't.
No. We're talking Kid Rock, Lee Greenwood. I'm talking
Wow.
about a Trump dance performance with the Village People. It definitely brought a certain level of, well, showmanship to the whole thing.
It certainly did. That's not something you see every day.
Definitely not your typical political event. But amidst all the fanfare, all the controversy, there was, of course, the main event, the inauguration ceremony itself, held within those historic walls of the Capitol Rotunda.
It's a pretty powerful image.
It is. JD Vance, Trump's running mate, was sworn in as vice president by Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And then it was Trump's turn. Chief Justice John Roberts administered the oath. But here's where things get interesting. Trump chose not to place his hand on a Bible during the ceremony.
He didn't?
Nope. A break from tradition that sparked a ton of conversation.
I can imagine. Some probably saw it as disrespectful, a lack of reverence for the office.
Right.
Others might have viewed it as a deliberate choice, a way to distance himself from certain groups.
Yeah, or maybe to signal a more secular approach to his presidency.
Interesting.
It definitely added another layer of intrigue to an already unconventional inauguration, but what everyone was really waiting for was, of course, the speech. Trump's second inaugural address. It was a chance for him to outline his vision for the next 4 years,
Right.
to address the nation, maybe even try to bridge some of those deep divisions in the country.
It was a tall order.
It was. So how did he do?
Well, the speech was a mix. You had some familiar themes, but also some bold new pronouncements.
Yeah.
He declared a new golden era for America, a time of prosperity, strength. But he also criticized the Justice Department under Merrick Garland,
Oh, right.
accusing them of being politicized, weaponized against his supporters.
Classic Trump. A blend of optimism and grievance.
Exactly. A promise of a brighter future, but also this denouncement of perceived enemies.
But beyond the rhetoric, he actually outlined some concrete plans, a real agenda for his second term. Gave everyone a glimpse into where he planned to take the country.
He did. He pledged to crack down on illegal immigration, to boost American energy production and manufacturing. He even talked about reinstating those soldiers and federal employees who were dismissed for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine.
Wow. Sounds like he came out swinging, ready to shake things up.
He did. And he also reiterated his commitment to recognizing only 2 genders, signaling a pretty socially conservative stance.
Anything else stand out from the speech?
Well, he floated some pretty audacious ideas, like bringing the Panama Canal back under U.S. control and designating those Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations.
Oh, wow. That's big.
It was a mix of populist appeals, concrete policy pronouncements, and some, well, let's say, eyebrow-raising proposals.
Yeah, those definitely left some people wondering how he planned to pull it all off.
They did. And remember all that talk about sending astronauts to Mars during his first term?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that made it come back in the speech, too. Space exploration remained a key aspiration for him. He presented it as a symbol of American ambition, technological prowess, a way to inspire the nation and reclaim its place as a leader in innovation.
It's like he was painting this picture of America on the world stage. Bold, ambitious, reaching for the stars.
It was a compelling image. And the speech itself generated a lot of buzz, analysis, debate, everything you'd expect.
I bet.
Newsrooms and living rooms across the country were dissecting every word. Reactions, as you might expect, fell along predictable partisan lines. Some praised the speech, calling it bold, visionary. Others were critical, calling it divisive, unrealistic. Some even pointed to dangerous rhetoric.
It's interesting how even one source, our Wikipedia article, can show us that range of interpretations, right? The different reactions to this event.
It is. It reminds us that history is never straightforward.
Right.
It's a tapestry of different perspectives, interpretations, biases.
Yeah. You can't just look at one thing in isolation.
Exactly. To understand something like this inauguration, we need to consider the context, the motivations,
The potential consequences.
both intended and unintended.
For sure. We've covered a lot of ground already. From the weather to the political atmosphere, the guests, the boycotts,
The speech,
even the speech itself. But the story of Trump's second inauguration doesn't end there.
it doesn't.
No way. There were the post-inauguration celebrations, both the official balls and all the unofficial parties that popped up across the city. Musicians like Nelly, Rascal Flatts, and Jason Aldean were all set to perform, added a bit of star power to the festivities.
Sound fun.
It was. But beyond the parties, there was a bigger question looming.
What's that?
What would the second term actually look like? How would Trump's agenda play out on a national and international stage? It's like the inauguration was just the opening act.
The beginning of a much bigger story.
Exactly.
The prelude to a much larger, more complex drama.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll take a closer look at the global implications of Trump's return to power.
Oh, this is going to be good.
It is. We'll explore the reactions of world leaders.
The impact on international relations.
And even the role of technology in shaping this new era of American leadership. You won't want to miss it. Okay, so we just explored the inauguration ceremony itself, the speeches and the guests and all that. But now let's zoom out a little bit and think about the global implications of Trump being back in the White House.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just Americans watching that day.
Right.
The whole world was basically glued to their screens for this historic event.
It's true. You know what really struck me was just how many different international figures were actually there.
Yeah.
This wasn't just another American political thing. It felt global.
Yeah.
Like everyone was acknowledging that we're all connected these days.
You're right. And we can't forget that Trump had laid out some pretty big plans for his second term.
He did.
I mean, stuff that would impact trade and foreign policy, even space exploration.
Yeah.
So how did the rest of the world react to him being back in charge and all the things he said he wanted to do?
Well, the reactions were kind of what you'd expect, a mixed bag.
Okay.
Some saw it as a chance to team up more,
Mm-hmm.
Strengthen those alliances.
Right.
But others were worried about things maybe becoming unstable,
I see.
or that American foreign policy would take a hard turn in a different direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's dig into that a bit. We know that leaders from those big QA nations,
Right.
India, Australia, Japan, they were all at the inauguration, and he even had meetings set up with Trump the day after.
They did.
So what was the deal with them being there? What does it tell us about how they felt about Trump being president again?
Well, the QA nations are kind of a team. Their whole purpose is to push back against China's growing power, especially in that Indo-Pacific region.
Okay.
And them showing up at the inauguration and then meeting with Trump afterwards,
Yeah.
it shows they were still committed to working together, even with a new, old president in the U.S.
So even though Trump was all about America first,
Right.
it seems like there was still this desire for collaboration and global partnership.
Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? You have this clash between what a president says to their own people
Right.
and what actually happens in international relations. Trump might have been shouting, America first from the rooftop. But he knew he needed to work with other countries to get what he wanted for America.
And let's not forget about those tech CEOs who were practically front and center at the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Guys like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg,
Mm-hmm.
Sundar Pichai from Google, even Tim Cook from Apple. They weren't just there for the photo op.
Not at all.
Their being there really shows just how powerful tech has become on the world stage
Totally.
and how it's all mixed up with politics now.
Absolutely. I mean, these are the people running companies that operate across borders,
Right.
They have a huge influence on how we communicate, how we buy and sell things,
Mm-hmm.
even how we interact with each other, and, how wars are fought.
Yeah.
So them being at the inauguration makes you wonder about the whole relationship between technology and governments and how it's all going to play out globally.
It really does. It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, how do we make sure these private companies are held accountable when they have so much power?
And what about all the ethical problems with new technology, like artificial intelligence or data privacy?
Right.
How do we handle all that in a world where everything's so interconnected?
It's like we're sailing into uncharted territory here. The old boundaries between governments, businesses, and technology, they're all getting blurry.
Exactly.
Mm.
And with Trump back in charge, who was known for being a bit unpredictable and, liking to shake things up,
Yeah.
the whole world was on edge trying to figure out what his second term would mean for everyone.
It's interesting that you bring up Trump's reputation because on the one hand, he was all about America first, putting American interests ahead of everything else.
Hmm.
But then you look at that guest list at the inauguration, all those global leaders and the meetings he had afterwards.
Right.
It kind of seems like he also wanted to work with the rest of the world at least a little bit.
You've hit on something really important. There's often a gap between what a president says
Yeah.
and what they actually do on the global stage.
Okay.
And with Trump, it seems like he knew he couldn't just ignore the rest of the world.
He had to keep those relationships going, even if he was still focused on getting the best deals for America.
So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from all this looking back?
I think it shows just how complicated global politics really is.
Okay.
It's not always clear-cut. There are always hidden motives and power struggles going on.
Right.
And events like this inauguration give us a peek behind the curtain. Let us see how those forces all interact with each other.
It reminds us that we can't just think about things from an American perspective. We
Right.
have to understand the whole global context
Yeah.
to really get the full picture.
Yeah, that's a great point. Which brings us to another question. What about the people who weren't exactly celebrating Trump's return? We know there were protests planned, and some members of Congress even boycotted the whole thing.
Yeah,
So how did those voices of dissent fit into this global narrative?
that's a great question. While the international community was watching the inauguration, they were also seeing this internal pushback within the U.S. The protests, the boycotts, it all showed that America was still deeply divided even as Trump started his second term.
We mentioned the People's March that happened right before the inauguration.
Yeah.
It was organized by some of the same groups that did the Women's March back in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But the news was saying that not as many people showed up this time.
That's right. Makes you wonder if maybe the political climate had changed somehow.
Yeah.
Or if people just weren't as fired up to protest during Trump's second go-around. Maybe they felt like it wouldn't make a difference or that they'd already said their piece.
It's interesting to think about how protests change over time,
It is.
especially when things are so politically charged.
Absolutely. And we also can't forget about those who decided to skip the inauguration altogether,
Yeah.
mostly Democratic members of Congress. They made it clear that they weren't going to pretend like they supported Trump's second term by being there.
Right. We saw that list of names, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Nancy Pelosi. They all had different reasons for not going. Some said they had other events for Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Right.
Others said they were still dealing with the trauma of that January 6th attack.
It was a powerful statement. They were rejecting Trump's presidency, saying they didn't approve of what was happening.
It's fascinating how protests and boycotts can be so powerful even if they don't immediately change things.
They are.
They remind us that even in a democracy, people are going to disagree.
Exactly.
And it's important to give those voices a platform.
Couldn't agree more. They challenge us to think critically, to question what we believe, and to see things from different perspectives.
Yeah.
And in a world where everyone's so quick to pick sides, that kind of open conversation is more important than ever.
I totally agree. So we have these protests happening, a boycott by members of Congress.
Right.
And then on the other side, you have this inauguration with all the celebrities and global leaders and tech giants. It really captures how complicated this moment in history was.
It does. And it shows how important it is to understand how domestic politics and what happens on the world stage all work together.
Yeah.
Because what happens in one country, especially in a country as powerful as the U.S.,
Right.
it affects everyone.
That's a really good point. And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our discussion, the lasting impact of this inauguration on the global stage.
Okay.
Did Trump's second term live up to what everyone was expecting? Did he do what people were worried about?
Yeah.
What were the long-term consequences of his policies and his approach to global leadership?
All good questions.
They are...
And that's exactly what we're going to explore in part 3. We're going to look at the legacy of Trump's second inauguration and how it all played out on the world stage.
So we've talked about the inauguration itself, the guests, the speeches, all the reactions, but now let's look ahead. What happened after all that? What was the lasting impact of Trump's second term on the rest of the world? It's time to move past the spectacle and dig into what actually happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look back and see if all those predictions and worries actually came true.
Right.
Remember, this was a pretty uncertain time for the whole world.
Right.
The U.S. was trying to figure out how to deal with China. New technologies were changing everything, and the old rules of global politics were kind of falling apart. And then you have Trump back in the Oval Office, someone who's known for doing things his own way and shaking things up.
Definitely a recipe for both good and bad things. So, what were the biggest ways that Trump's second term affected the global landscape?
Well, one of the first things people were watching was what would happen with other countries.
Right.
That inauguration was a real turning point because for the first time, foreign leaders were officially invited. It was a break from tradition, and everyone's wondering how those relationships would change with Trump back in charge.
We saw leaders from all over the place at the inauguration. The Chinese vice president, the Israeli prime minister, representatives from those important QUAD nations. So, did those relationships get better, or did things get messy with Trump calling the shots?
Honestly, it was a bit of both. Some alliances got stronger, and others became strained. Trump was really focused on trade deals, especially with China,
Okay.
and that created a lot of uncertainty in the global economy. His America First approach sometimes went against what our allies wanted,
Right.
which led to some disagreements and renegotiations.
Yeah, it makes sense. Trade wars and protectionist policies can really mess things up for everyone.
Exactly. And that America First talk, while it was popular with some people in the U.S., definitely made our international partners nervous. They felt like America wasn't as reliable anymore, like we were putting our own interests ahead of everyone else's.
So even though there were attempts to keep those important relationships going, like those meetings with the QAD leaders, there was also this feeling that the U.S. was going its own way, maybe even stepping back from its role as a global leader.
That's a great point. Trump's foreign policy was all about making deals. He wanted to get specific things for the U.S. instead of focusing on this big idea of global order or working together with other countries. So some people started to wonder if the U.S. was giving up its leadership on things like climate change, human rights, helping developing countries.
And what about those tech CEOs who were all buddy-buddy with the administration? Did their presence and those close ties actually lead to any changes in global tech policy or regulations?
That's a tricky one. It has both domestic and international angles. On one hand, having those tech leaders talking directly to the president and other powerful people definitely created opportunities for them to work together on things like cybersecurity, data privacy, and how to regulate new technologies.
Right.
But also raised concerns about whether those companies had too much influence over the government and whether they were shaping regulations to benefit themselves.
It makes you wonder who was really calling the shots when it came to tech policy. Were those decisions made for the good of everyone, or were they just about helping those big tech companies make more money?
That's a debate that's still going on. And it's not just about what happens in the U.S. The decisions made in Silicon Valley affect everyone.
Right.
They shape everything from how our data is used to how artificial intelligence is developed, the spread of misinformation, even the future of work. So it's really important to understand the role of those tech companies and how they interact with governments if we want to handle the challenges and opportunities of this digital world we live in.
It sounds like this inauguration was more than just a symbolic event. It really had the power to change global politics, economics, and technology. And we're still seeing those effects today.
You're absolutely right. And it reminds us that we live in a world where everything's connected. What happens in one country, especially a powerful one like the U.S., it can spread and impact everyone else. Whether it's trade wars, new inventions, or changes in foreign policy, those decisions have consequences that go way beyond borders.
Makes you think about the legacy of all this. What will people say about Trump's second inauguration 50 years from now?
I think they'll focus on how unusual it was.
Mm-hmm.
Trump having a second term that wasn't back-to-back and all the political divisions in the U.S. at the time. And of course, they'll look at the big global changes that were happening back then. They'll probably analyze how technology and social media shaped the event and what happened afterward.
Right.
And they'll definitely study how Trump's policies affected things like international relations, global trade, and technological innovation. It's amazing how one day or even just a few hours can have such a big impact on the world.
It really is. It just goes to show how important it is to stay informed and engaged with what's happening both here at home and around the world.
I completely agree. And that's what makes studying history so valuable. It helps us understand the present and get ready for the future. By looking at the choices made in the past and what happened because of them, we can learn about the forces that shape our world and make better decisions about where we want to go from here.
I like that. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about the weather, the politics, the guests, the speeches, the protests, the global implications of Trump's second term. But like always, there's always more to explore.
That's the best part about a deep dive like this. It makes you want to learn more and keep digging. It's not about having all the answers, but about opening up new questions and ways of understanding things.
Exactly. So for our listeners who are ready to keep learning, I have a challenge for you. Think about all those global leaders who were at Trump's second inauguration and all the different opinions about his plans. What do you think the long-term impact of that event will be? What surprised you the most about what we uncovered today? How might the choices made during Trump's second term still be affecting us now? There's always something new to discover, new connections to make, more insights to uncover. That's the beauty of history. It's a conversation that never really ends.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.